Hey everyone, welcome and into another episode of the Announcers Hour podcast. I'm your host, Patrick McCall. Thanks for tuning in. Today we have Bryan Sleik on the podcast, and he comes in as the voice of the Portland Pilots. And as such, he's been able to call a number of different sports over the years. So he's going to have some great knowledge to give out today. And Bryan, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's kind of the summertime, so a bit down for me because UP's not in session right now, so kind of taking care of some things around the house and doing some other side work during the summer.
And what have you been up to like recently in regards to, play-by-play or broadcasting?
Yeah, so normally I work at the University of Portland. I take care of their play-by-play for volleyball, men's and women's basketball, and baseball. On top of that, I also do the state championships for basketball, the 6A level, called the state championships for volleyball and for football as well here in the state of Oregon, and uh, call high school football for Central Catholic, which is sort of like a local power around here in Oregon. And then I also do some work with the WCC. Just got back from Vegas a couple weeks ago doing their WCC baseball tournament. So keep myself pretty busy throughout the year for the most part.
And do you kind of, are you pretty much in a sprint from about August until, May or June, whatever it is?
Yeah, basically. I mean, once August gets going, you got your home volleyball tournaments that start up here at UP. Football season gets going as well. So basically, once August gets going, I'm calling multiple sports. For August through basically March. And then baseball is its own thing. I mean, but baseball is more frequent than any of the other sports. So you're getting three, four, sometimes even five games in a week sometimes. So yeah, that's usually how it is. Yeah, dead sprint from August to basically, I mean, if you count the WCC tournament all the way through May for the most part. Yeah.
And how do you, manage all that going on at one time? Can you talk about what kind of an average week is at Portland if there's multiple sports going on?
Yeah, so normally it's all about getting prep ready to go for what team is coming in. So for normally we've got a home tournament, so I'm prepping for four teams in a short amount of time. But I make sure that if games are going to be on Thursdays and Saturdays, for the Thursday games, I'm setting up for interviews on Tuesday with opposing coaches, Fridays with opposing coaches for Saturday's games. I find it very important to talk to both sides. I work very hard at trying not to be a homer because I think it's very important, especially for people like us in the industry, that even though we take pride in the team that we're calling, it's important to be able to show both sides of everything that's going on. So, yeah, Tuesdays and Fridays, I usually set up for prep for interviews. Mondays and Wednesdays, I'm usually trying to get the opposing team in order, and then Wednesday night, I'll start putting together my spotting chart that I have for volleyball that day, or if I got football on Friday, because that's usually how it is: Thursday, Friday, Saturday for me in the fall season. Same thing. Friday morning, I'm setting up and doing all my football spotting boards after talking to coaches on Wednesday. And so all that sort of leads up to, you could say, close to 4 hours of prep for per game. And I would say I probably don't even use about 25% of it, and that might even be a high percentage. But I find that having myself overly prepped makes it a lot easier to call games in case things get out of hand. Volleyball can really stretch out to 5 sets. There's no real time limit. Where for football, for our case with Central Catholic, they've put a hurting on some teams over the last few years of like 63-7. And so you've got a running clock in the second half, and you have to find different tidbits to really talk about and keep the audience engaged while the game is still going on. And so, yeah, that's usually a typical week for me. I mean, Monday and Tuesday are just prepping for teams, interviews on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, usually, just depending on what game or what day of the week the game is falling on. And same thing in the winter season. Things can get pretty hectic in the non-conference season for basketball, to where normally it is Thursday, Saturday, but with non-conference, you're going to get a game on Monday, and then women are playing on Wednesday, men are back at it on Thursday, then the women play on Sunday, and it's just a lot of back and forth. And just, I would say the biggest thing for me is having my own pocketbook calendar, so I can constantly, hey, I need to take care of this on this date. That way I can stay on top of everything that's going to my work.
Yeah, it's a lot to balance when you have so many sports going on. And so, on boards and stuff and your charts, what are the things that you like to have on there in terms of statistical and also background research or quotes and stuff like that?
Yeah, so my main thing, usually I start out, I've got I found this template on staatalent.org. It's an open website. You can go and find it, but it's a Word document. But basically, first one, I always have name, their position right next to it. So for volleyball, it'll be middle blocker, outside hitter, right side, DS, libero, one of those. So their name dash their position, their height, what year they are, their previous school or high school, and then their hometown. That is just on one tiny little square. So I have all that information. The next square I go over is just what are they averaging this year? And it's just mainly stats that stick out. I don't need to have every little thing, like they're averaging zero point 0.2 digs. Well, it's a middle blocker. So like they're not usually one to get a dig anyway. So I'm not going to put that into my stat sheet or anything like that. And then, I'm going based off of volleyball because that's what's coming up next. But, swing percentage, serve percentage are usually key ones. For basketball, I'll do free throw and 3-point percentage that I usually look at. And then on the side, where all my notes are usually just tidbits. With each person that I try to research for, I go to their team website. I'm Googling their names for stories. And if I can condense it into a couple words to kind of spark a memory for me that I can go expound upon whatever that story is, that'll be on my text box to my side on top of, what are they doing in conference this year? Are they leading the conference in any categories? And so are they leading the conference in, X, Y, Z? Are they leading their team? All these types of things are just going in my notes box, but all that fits in honestly like a legal size sheet of cardstock paper here, actually. Everything fits on a sheet of paper about this size for me. I don't have anything printed on this, but that's where all my notes end up coming from. If I can't fit it on there, I usually have a Word document that'll be open to whatever roster is playing that day, and I'll have that up next to the live stats that are going on. And that's only if I can't fit it onto my sheet. For the most part, I can fit just about everything on there and not have to worry about it. But with baseball, it's a little different. Baseball, I just do my schedule, or excuse me, I do my roster notes just on a Word document. A lot of it is just I don't do copy and paste. I rewrite everything out because I find out that helps me more remember everything that's going down. And so with baseball, I'll do name, position, height, all that stuff, and then all that is just in a Word document. Sometimes I'll print it out and I'll hang it on the booth right next to me. That way I don't have to fiddle around on my computer or anything like that. Just a quick glance over. Everything's in numerical order, so I know exactly who I'm going to. And yeah, I mean, it's a process. You really want to be prepared with all of this stuff. You know, I I don't know what your experience is, but I'm sure, at Miami, you're getting all these, or you did get all these packets of notes and information. And, a lot of people show up last minute and just kind of go through that. And then when it comes to the game, they want to reference something, like they're scrambling through the piece of paper to try to find what they're looking for. And it's like, well, I already did all my prep. And on top of interviewing coaches, I'm reaching out to SIDs to get those note packets days in advance before game day. So I can look at those and highlight what I want to put into my notes and what I can share onto my spotting chart and things like that.
And that's definitely good to be prepared, and certainly there's so much that goes into it before a game. And at Portland, I mean, how many years have you been there? I guess just for those that aren't familiar. And then secondly, how did you get into that role?
How did I get into what? I'm sorry.
To the role at Portland and calling all those games?
Yeah, so I've been working at Portland since fall 2019, so just before the great Panini happened. And yeah, I mean that all came from just working in Ridgefield, to be honest. I came out to the West Coast when I first graduated from college in 2016, took a job in Port Angeles, and didn't go very well, very smoothly. Just had some issues with ownership over there and how they were running their business, and knew I wanted to come back out to this area. So I moved home and did a couple other jobs. I worked at a radio station outside of Green Bay, Wisconsin for a little bit. then worked with Northern Illinois football and softball back in my home state, and then just wanted to get back out into this area. So the spring, just after it turned into 2019, I figured I'd take a stab at it. Looked at the West Coast League website and noticed that there were a couple teams that were joining the league this year. And at the time, it was the Ridgefield Raptors. It was going to be their first year, so I reached out to them. And over a couple of weeks of talking with Jason Crone and Gus Farah, and my ability to have my own equipment and talk it through with them, we built a trust and a relationship. And that turned into the job working with the Raptors for the summer of 2019 in their first year. And that all turned into working over at UP from UP having a couple guys on that baseball team. So their assistant coach had heard what I had done, and knew that they were looking for a new baseball broadcaster. So he reached out to the assistant athletic director in broadcasting and saying, "Hey, you need to take a look at this guy, at least just for baseball, if nothing else." And then I had my host family. He's the former mayor of Ridgefield, but he's a UP alum, and he also reached out to the athletic department without me even knowing. But he's like, "Hey, listen, this guy's looking to stay around. I think he's really good. I've heard good feedback from other people." And so again, he reached out, and then the last person that reached out was one of our players' dads. He is an administrator at the University of San Diego, so in UP's conference, and he reached out to UP and was like, "Hey, this is a fantastic broadcaster right here. I really think that it would benefit you guys to have him in your rotation." And so I got hired to just do baseball right after the season ended. I would say probably 2 weeks after the Raptors season ended. I was talking with UP about doing baseball for them, and about a week later, they're like, "Well, our volleyball guy left. We're wondering, like, how comfortable are you with volleyball?" I said, "I'm very comfortable with volleyball. I played volleyball in college, so I knew the rules and the cadence of everything. It just had never been on." So they asked me to do volleyball, and I had played volleyball in college, so I was like, "Yeah, I know the sport. I'll be more than happy to call it." I was more eager than anything because I always found volleyball to be fascinating, not just to play, but watching at the Olympic level and seeing how that all played out. And then a week after that, the women's basketball person took the job as the radio guy for the Blazers. And then whoever's doing men's basketball moved back to New York. I might have flip flopped those, but either way, the basketball job opened up basically around the same time. So in a matter of a couple weeks, ended up being the voice for volleyball, men's, women's basketball, and baseball over at UP. And it was just from couple people reaching out without me knowing and on my behalf, and I honestly I can't thank them enough because I've been here for 5 years now and I love it. And people I work with every day are great. The administration at UP has allowed me to uh, honestly do just about anything that I want, and they've backed me up too. I mean, they helped me get the job over with the West Coast Conference for the baseball tournament because of my work that I did, over the last 3, 4, 5 years with UP.
And UP's got a lot of sports going on, but how did you also get into your role in football? Because that's one of the varsity sports that's not with the Pilots. So how did you get that gig as well up in the Northwest?
Yeah, that one was a bit more tricky for me. So, I started out my first year at UP, I was just doing volleyball. I didn't do any football yet. Um, they didn't really have football that next fall because of COVID, so it all rolled over into the spring season here. And so there were a couple high schools that in Vancouver, Washington, from the Vancouver Public School District, that played at this place called Kiggins Bowl, and they usually have a game of the week. And I just reached out to who was running it at the time and asked if they wanted somebody to do play-by-play. I was just looking for football reps to do because I hadn't really done that since, I did a little bit for Northern Illinois, but I wouldn't say I was doing play-by-play. But I did play-by-play when I was in college for a high school in the area. So I just wanted to get reps doing that. And so I started out doing Vancouver Public Schools, doing their radio and their TV broadcast for that. It was like on a local Comcast station. And then Ann Schatz, who comes in and does some UP basketball games, like some of the bigger games, like when Gonzaga's here, and occasionally like St. Mary's and stuff, when they have big time TV stuff. She'll come in, but her and I have become really close friends since I started. Cause so when I got there in 2019. She hadn't been working at UP, but I was still relatively green, so they wanted to bring in somebody for TV, and that just started this relationship with her. Well, one of her good friends is or was the athletic director at Central Catholic. She has since stepped down over the last couple weeks, but she worked at Central Catholic, and she knew that they were looking for somebody to call their games. They had had somebody the last couple years, but it wasn't necessarily the voice or the I don't want to say the professionalism that they were looking for, but it just didn't sound right to them. So they were looking for somebody new, and because of my connection with Ann and how she knew Laura Yeager, the AD over at Central Catholic, we sort of set up a meeting and felt each other out in a way of just being like, yeah, I think this could be a good fit. And so I've been doing it now for this past year was year 3, so I've had the chance to call football games for 2 state champion teams, and they made it to the semifinals the year they didn't win the state championship. So that's sort of how I got into doing football with them, and they've got their live stream on YouTube, and then for the playoffs, we usually do like a radio broadcast because of I guess like NFHS usually has the rights to playoffs now.
Well, that's amazing. And football is a whole a whirlwind in and of itself. But bringing it back to baseball for a moment, you were here in Ridgefield, where I'm at right now, which is interesting. First season, you're the inaugural announcer, which is only one person can say that per team. So how was that like? And just going to your experience here with the Raptors.
Yeah, I mean that first season, like I said, I kind of had a bad experience my first time in this league, and so I wasn't quite sure what I was kind of walking into. I had had good conversations with Gus and Jason for the most part, but once I got here and talked to the coaches and talked to the ownership group, and we got together and immediately wanted to say, okay, what's our vision? What are we trying to do here? What would you like to have done? And honestly, it was kind of I don't want to say making it up on the fly, but it's that first year, so you're not really quite sure how something's supposed to run from the organization standpoint. And so they're feeling some things out. I was feeling some things out. Like the first day that we were working, I mean, now up in that booth area, like you have a booth now. When I first started, there was nothing there, so your voice was echoing all throughout in that building, and so they eventually figured out we had to put up some I don't want to say it was cardboard. It was like a styrofoam siding that they put up to try to catch some sound and make sure it didn't bounce around too much. And that actually helped out a lot. But, talking with coaches like Nick Allen and Chris Cota were uh, amazing in the way that they kind of just put you at ease. That first year I was a bit nervous just because I wanted to do a good job. And I knew that, this would be my opportunity to step up and go to the next area. And thankfully it played out that way. But I put a lot of pressure on myself in that sense. So, a lot of people are going out after games and going to do things. And I went home and made a fire out in the backyard and was getting prep ready for the next game. And so like that was sort of how my summer went with everybody. But, the bus rides were great. I loved everybody on those bus rides. It was a lot of fun. There was a learning experience. Some guys try to big time you when you first get on the bus, and um, but you start to grow a relationship with those guys on those road trips. We went to Kelowna on our first road trip after having the home opening series against Cowlitz, and then yeah, that was I want to say it was like an 11-hour bus ride. And so it's just you and the guys stuck on a bus for that long from 4 in the morning until basically 3 in the afternoon when you show up and you got to go straight to the ballpark. And but that first year was special. I mean, I would not say the team was overly great by any means, but it was a fun group of guys to work with. I mean, we had Trevor Hoffman's son, so Wyatt Hoffman was on our team. He's playing with the Lake Illinois Storm now. We had Aaron Zavala, who was the Pac-12 Player of the Year a couple years ago for Oregon. He was a second-round draft pick, and Justin Boyd, who was playing at Oregon State, and he too was a second-round draft pick. And it's funny how summer ball ends up working out because Boyd, who got drafted as a second-round pick as an outfielder, came to us as a middle infielder. He was a second baseman out of high school in Parker, Colorado, and then we were just like, well, we kind of need some outfield right now. And he was a bit hesitant at first, but Alan and Coda convinced him. And I would say that it worked out pretty well for him now that he's playing. I believe he's at double A. If not double A, he's at high A right now, but still doing well right now. And pro ball. But that summer, I still think back to guys I still chit chat with, like Steve Ramirez, who's the catcher. He ended up at the time he was at a JUCO, and then he transferred to Purdue and spent his last couple of years there. I think about Cameron Rapetti, who coming into that year was ranked like the second, third baseman in the state of California. He was supposed to get drafted high, but he told teams that he wanted a high signing bonus, and so at the time there was still 40 rounds, and he fell in the late 30s, and still went to school to Cal State Fullerton. And so it's just you're getting all these different people to really come together and play ball, but the fun thing about that team was even though usually you're getting all these kids from different areas of the country, a lot of these guys had played ball with each other before. Like Rapetti and Ramirez knew each other, and I think Grayson Sterling and Michael Hicks knew each other already. And so like all these guys, they already had some little seeds of friendships. And so it was just fun to see all that play out throughout the year. And, I can't say enough fond things about my time with Ridgefield there. Like I think about how they did an adoption day, and like they brought puppies to the field, and just seeing the guys' faces light up, and helping the adoption agency do that. But then seeing some good ball. I mean, traveling to Victoria, and watching Johnny Weaver hit a late inning home run to clinch the victory for us against the Harbor Cats, who historically are usually one of the better teams in the league. So yeah, I don't know if I just answered your question. I just kind of went and rambled on there, but no, I love my time in Ridgefield, and like it's a great spot to really get a bearing for yourself and what you want to do in your career.
In Ridgefield, in that spot in the West Coast League, you're sharing bus rides and getting like, a sprint of games in so many days. And there's a lot of stories that, kind of go uncovered throughout that. And you talked about the camaraderie on the bus and everything. And so do you have, a top few stories to share that were really funny and amazing and also can be shared because there's also some stuff that, definitely will go off camera, off, the microphone, off the record.
Yeah, no. There's some that I probably shouldn't share. One of the funnier moments, though, thinking back to that season. So Michael Hicks was an outfielder for us, played a little bit of first base as well. He's a big lefty bat. And coming out of high school, he was drafted by the Yankees in the 30 rounds, somewhere in there. And so there was a lot of high praise for what he was going to be able to do. And so we were on a road trip. I want to say it was Yakima Valley. Um, that or it was Volleyball. It was one of those two. It was one of our last road trips of the year. But he had just played at the University of Portland, and he was transferring to, at the time, Boise State was starting their baseball program. Unfortunately, with COVID, they got, I think, like 7 or 8 games in, and then COVID killed the program. So he was transitioning to a different school. But here we are, getting off the bus. Guys had a workout, and he had these purple tights that he wore for every practice, everything, and they had holes in them. Like you could just tell that he was wearing them nonstop. And so I was rooming with with Nick Allen, one of the coaches for Ridgefield, and we were right next to Hicks's room, and so we decided to go out. He had been talking to this girl at one point, and so we decided to take those purple, leggings or whatever. Allen takes them, puts them on, and then he puts on his baseball pants, so you can't tell that he's wearing those sweats. So we get to the baseball stadium to get our warm-ups in and everything, and Hicks is like, "Man, somebody stole my pants." Like, I don't know who it is. We were talking to some other people. We saw they were close to our room, and I left them on my railing, and somebody just took them. We don't know where it is. So here he is. He's taking his practice swings. At the time, Rob Paramo was the pitching coach, so he was throwing BP at the time. And Hicks is warming up, getting a couple swings in, and then I look over in the dugout. Nick Allen just taking off his baseball pants. You see him in the purple stretching pants, and he gets up and he's going down the first baseline, just getting up, stretching all the way down, trying to get into the view of Michael Hicks. And then Hicks finally turns and he just busts out laughing because he can't believe that Allen fit into his pants. And he's just trying to stretch all the way out from first base to second base slowly, each step getting into the view of Hicks. And he just had to stop taking BP and bust out laughing because our coach was stealing his pants and wearing them out on the ballpark and everything else like that.
It's amazing. I've never heard of anything, any situation like that. But, off that point, Ridgefield was one of your stops, and you obviously spent time in Portland and been Central Michigan. A lot of people would be, envious of what you've been able to do. But were there any times where you didn't think, you were going to be able to make doing play-by-play as a career?
All the time. I mean, I even with the amount of opportunities that I have right now, I still feel that way sometimes. It's a tough way to make a living for the most part. One of the things I found out in this industry pretty quick is everybody's trying to get their game up on air, but they're also trying to get it done for as cheap as possible at all times. And so, you and I had lunch before, but what I made in Ridgefield is not what you're making in Ridgefield. You're making more than I did, which is great. I'm happy to hear that. I love that it's growing in a sense that you can be compensated fairly and everything else like that. Not that they did anything wrong to me. I don't want that to be misconstrued in any way, but it was just, you know, different time. And, when I first got to UP, it's not like I was making, big bucks or anything like that. I was just happy to get basically enough to cover my rent for that month, and just games. And then I found a secondary job that would also help with some income. I mean, rent in Portland is not exactly cheap. I was living with two people at the time right after Ridgefield. I was fortunate enough that my host family let me stay a couple more months after the season ended. They're like, hey, listen, you at least already found a job. If you need a couple more months to find an apartment, feel free to stay through October. And I did, thankfully, because they were so nice, and still like cooked me meals and brought me out to dinner and things like that. And it allowed me to save a little bit of money, but it's just not it wasn't a great paycheck to start out, and it's still tough at times. Uh, when I started at UP, I was only making $100 a game, which doesn't cover rent all that much here in the Portland area. That has since grown, but it's a yearly thing though, and it's still not exactly the most pay. Like I'm still working a couple of secondary jobs to help make ends meet, but those first couple years, especially after my terrible time in Port Angeles, yeah, I definitely, had some second thoughts on whether or not I wanted to continue pursuing this as a career. And um, but you find out that there are people in the industry that once you start working and they hear your work and they want to help you out. So that was the other thing I learned in this industry is, if you take pride in your work and you feel like you do a good job and some other people are noticed, like I haven't met very many people that don't want to help you succeed, in this industry if they're already in it. And that's why and shots for me was a big one. You know, as I said, there are still times now when it's like, hey, I need to kind of move up into a bigger entity. I love UP. I don't necessarily want to give up the UP games, but I do know that I need to move up in the world if I want to continue to keep doing this as a profession. Um, it's patience is the big thing. You're never going to make a lot of money when you first start out. So I hope nobody ever thinks that. I knew that going in, that it was probably going to be a 5 to 10 year process before you start making real money to live off of for the most part. And so that would I would say is the biggest mental struggle or hurdle to get over. It's the fact that you're trying to grow as a broadcaster, as a person, but also you got to live. And so part of it is taking up second jobs that maybe you don't really like. I mean, I worked as a server for multiple years while I was trying to get the Ridgefield job. Before that, I did serving for 5 plus years and I hated it and got talked down a lot by people. And it's like, oh, why don't you go get a college degree? It's like, well, I actually do have a college degree in broadcasting, but there's just not many opportunities for what I'm trying to do. So for you, when you got this opportunity with Ridgefield, I hope you're, grabbing it by both hands and running with it right now, because it's these type of opportunities, these summer league things, whether it's the Cape Cod or the Pioneer League or here in the West Coast League, those are valuable reps to get, and you should take those seriously every single time because, yeah, I mean, a lot of people find out by doing this job that maybe this isn't exactly what they want to do. I've known that I've wanted to do this for such a long time. That's why I've stayed with it, even through the adversity of dealing with some terrible people and dealing with some bad pay. But I knew that connections that I made um, from some of those jobs that maybe didn't go so well have actually still helped me out going forward. So it's trying to keep a positive mindset, take it day by day. There's going to be days when it's like, man, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Like I'm tired of constantly cold emailing people, cold calling people, just searching for the next job. It's never ending for the most part. Like, sure, feel comfortable that you've got, I'm going to use you as an example. Hey, I got the Ridgefield job for the summer. Like, I'm set for this summer. But once July comes around, you're just like, well, I got to start looking for other work then too, because this season is going to end, and that's where I've been fortunate with UP in the sense where I don't necessarily have to go fishing for other jobs so much because UP gives me 75 to 100 games a year that I'm working. And, I don't have to break my back to go do this high school basketball game that my first year at UP, I was jumping all over to go do it because I needed more reps, I needed more pay. And, that is kind of the never ending cycle in this business of always having to look for work and what's the next step for me. There's nothing wrong with being comfortable with where you're at right now, but you need to know that you can't stay there forever. Like you have to grow as a person, and that's kind of what I've been learning over the last few years. When I first started at UP, I kind of gave myself a 5-year window of what I wanted to do. I wanted to get all these reps in multiple sports, and for me, the next jump was whether it's Fox Sports, NBC Sports, which in the Northwest is no more a thing, unfortunately, but CBS Sports or ESPN, whatever it is, because I've diversified my play-by-play in multiple sports that I thought that was going to help me get to the next level, in which it's still a high possibility and everything. It's just taken a bit longer than I anticipated because as much praise as people have given me, there are still plenty of other highly qualified broadcasters out there, and you just kind of have to realize that, hey, you may be the best, but there are some connections for some other people, and it might just not work out for you in that one. But don't give up necessarily. Like there have been multiple people who are like, I'm surprised you're not at a bigger place right now. It's like, well, it's just opportunity hasn't necessarily come up yet. But still keeping an eye out for it. And that's the big thing.
Yeah, and you touched on so many different great points there from, the money side of things. You can't really be in it for the money, or you'll be probably disappointed for those that are out there and thinking it. And then secondly, it's certainly a grind, and you're always, always looking to improve and look for the next thing. It can be really unstable to start out. So that's definitely a good message for those that are looking to get into this. But and coming back to the Ridgefield side of things, and that was obviously an earlier stop, but can you talk about what came before that? And I believe, you're in central Michigan, and then also you talk about your stops in northern Illinois. What was it like when you were first, in your early 20s in the industry?
Yeah, so I was fortunate at Central Michigan. We had a broadcasting program, so um, we actually had set up for our own radio station. So we did radio broadcast for baseball and softball games. Um, I mean, believe it or not, I was so nervous the first time. I was a doubleheader for softball for Central Michigan. I forget who they were playing. I want to say they were playing Oakland, um, but they we're like, all right, we're gonna go live in 15 seconds. All right, so I already had my open written up and everything else like that. And Christian Taylor, who now lives on the East Coast, he does stuff with MLS and a couple other entities, but he was my broadcast partner that day. And he goes, all right, ready? Like, yeah, nodded my head. All right, and go. And I just froze. Just didn't say anything for the first 5, 10 seconds that we were on the air. And then I looked at him and I was like, well, what? And he just started talking, and once he got going, I all that just kind of went out the window for me, and I was fine after that. But yeah, that first broadcast was an interesting one to say the least. Doubleheader for softball, and my opportunity with baseball and softball at Central Michigan, I think helped out tremendously. I mean, we talked about the bus rides for Ridgefield, but that was actually my first opportunity to sit with teams and go on the road with them. For softball, we went to Northern Illinois, which for me was basically a homecoming because I live about 35 minutes away from DeKalb. But so, going to those games, and then for baseball, they went to Western Michigan. I would go to Michigan State for those midweek games, especially for softball as well. And so, those opportunities for me were fantastic. I was dealing with a guy named Adam Jacksa, who is now the voice of the Chippewas. He does their men's basketball, he does their football on radio as well. But he gave me some good tidbits. That was my first time actually doing play-by-play during that. It was my senior year of college because the first few years I was playing volleyball, so I didn't really have a whole bunch of free time, especially in the spring season, which is our season, to do any play-by-play stuff. So that senior year for me, I finally tried out, and I had to do basically had to do a mock play-by-play of a College World Series game. It was Arkansas versus somebody. I remember Benintendi was still on the team for Arkansas. It was the year that he got drafted. But I had to do that, and it was a great experience because for me, I am confident when I have like all my prep and everything else like that. But when it comes to like interviews with coaches and players and things like that, it's gonna sound so dumb, but like when I was in college, it was just like, all right, these guys are Division I athletes, and don't want to ask like any stupid question or anything like that. And in all reality, like they're just as nervous as you are sometimes when you stick a microphone in front of their face. So like you really don't have to be so nervous to do that type of job, but having that opportunity, like for every single home game, I talked to Margot Yonker, who was the head softball coach who worked for USA Softball as well. I talked to Steve Jacksa, who was the head baseball coach at the time when I was there, and so doing those interviews daily helped relieve the nerves that I usually had in those types of situations. Um, because I'm I don't know what you guys learned, but it's kind of common knowledge, I guess. But basically, just no yes or no questions. And so when you're trying to think of a question on the fly, I'm constantly trying to make sure that it's not a yes or no question. I may overthink it sometimes, but going through that experience and talking to those coaches who basically were seasoned veterans with talking to these kids who were trying to get in the broadcast industry, they were very gracious with their time. And I think that helped me out tremendously, kind of giving me that inside look about how the program is run and what coaches are looking for out of their players and things like that. And from there, I um, had an extra semester that I did, and so that's when I did some play-by-play for high school football in the area as well that I alluded to earlier. And that kind of got me interested and wanted to check out some new places in my life. That's basically what I've been doing for most of my life. I grew up in Naperville, but went to Central Michigan to sort of, I don't want to say restart, but you know, get a fresh look at some things, go to some places I'd never been before. I'd been in the state of Illinois almost my entire life. Not that I traveled too far into Michigan and the Midwest, but from there, I was like, I kind of want to go to the West Coast and see what it's all about. And Port Angeles at the time, they were moving. They were the Kitsap Blue Jackets, so they were in Bremerton, Washington, and which is west side of the Sound from Seattle. And so they were looking to move because they had some hardships with the city, but that mainly came from the ownership group. Um, and so Port Angeles was looking for a broadcaster, and so I applied with them and went through this whole process with them. And um, I had an opportunity to sit down and talk to them, and it seemed like a great fit at the time. But it turns out that the owner for that team is power hungry and a narcissist in a way, and he's just not a very friendly person to work for. He was verbally abusive to people, and especially people who worked under me, and I wasn't going to have it. I felt like it sort of fell on me as, I don't want to say I was their boss because we were all like interns, but I was the top of the broadcasting stuff. And then there were a couple people that were underneath me. And so it's like, hey, listen, you want to talk to me that way? That's fine. I'm 22, 23. I'm out of school. If that's how you want to run your business, it's not right, but I'll accept the brunt of it. you leave my people out of it though. Don't talk badly to them. They're trying to learn. These are people who were still in school. And so like this was their first opportunity. And so I felt like it was for me, it was I just felt like I had to look out for them in a way. And that guy didn't let up. And so I just straight up told him, I was like, listen, if you want to have a broadcast, you need to clean things up. And he had some choice words. I said, okay, all right, it's opening day today. Have fun not having a broadcaster. And so I took it upon myself to step away from that toxic situation. And that goes back to one of those moments where, I don't know if this is really for me. You know, I put so much time and effort and it sounds so weird to say that because I only spent like 3, 4 weeks total with them. I showed up a few weeks early before the season started to help out and get things ready because their stadium renovations were behind and sponsorships were behind. So I was like, oh, I'll get out there early and do all that. But I was busting my hump for them, and they just didn't see it that way. And so yeah, I stepped away from that, and I was homeless, living out of my car for 2 months. I was traveling to Seattle to apply for jobs at radio stations. I was out of my car every single morning. I'd go to the library because it had free Wi-Fi, and look for local jobs, the local radio stations in Squim, in Port Angeles, Port Townsend, down the Sound. What about Tacoma? And I had a friend, fortunately for me, she had just moved out of her apartment in Seattle, and she goes, "Hey, it's not anything glamorous. There's nothing in there right now, but I have a week left on my lease. If you want to go to Seattle and apply for these jobs, feel free to, stay there." So it was a cement room in the basement basically, and I folded up my clothes and used that as like a comforter bed, whatever you wanted to call it. That's what I slept on for that week. And, it was a humbling experience, but I would also say one of my better experiences. As bad as it was dealing with Port Angeles and those people, it allowed me to sort of reassess some things. And, I finally got a chance to explore a little bit. And by that, I just mean going to the national parks and, getting in touch with nature, as weird as that might sound. But like coming from outside of Chicago, there's not really like any nature or anything like that. It's kind of a concrete jungle in the city. And then we were a buzz and burb for the most part. I mean, it's considered one of the better places to raise a family, but there's no real nature appeal or anything like that. And so I was out in this area by myself, and I'd walk through the Olympic National Forest every single day to like reset my mind and, hey, here's maybe some things that you could work on going forward, just like communication skills, things like that. And so, even though it was a terrible experience, it allowed me to live in the moment. And after dealing with Port Angeles, even though I was living out of my car, like it was still some of the more enjoyable times that I had. As strange as that sounds, but it's just trying to make the best of what ended up being a really bad situation. And so after that, I couldn't find any more work. Money ran out for me, and so I had to make my way back home. I feel so bad. There was a guy at the local radio station. He had since retired a couple years when I went back, but he was a Chicagoland guy, and he heard my story, and he thought it was BS, and he was like, "Here's $200. Like, here's some gas money. Like, just get home. Like, I'm sorry all this went for you." And he was so nice, and I was incredibly appreciative of that, because that really those $200 really did help me get home, without having to. It sounds a little different, but like I didn't want to ask my parents to help me out in that situation. It's kind of a pride moment of I just got out of school. Um, for lack of a better phrase, I sort of dug my own grave on this one, so I kind of need to work my way out of this one and get. I will never say that I made it on my own because there's gentlemen, like in Port Angeles that gave me those $200 to get back home that allowed me to get home. And so I get back home after that, and I'm just trying to figure out what's next in my life. And there was a news and sports director position that opened up at a small radio station about 30 miles west of Green Bay in a place called Shawano, Wisconsin. And I was told it was going to be about 60-40 play-by-play to news stuff, and it ended up being about 95 news and 5% play-by-play. And I was kind of miserable because I was working long days. I'd have to get to the station at 4:30 in the morning, and then some days I would leave at 6:30. Sometimes I had to go cover a night story, or I had to go to a city hall meeting, and then I wouldn't get home until 9:30, 10 o'clock. And it's like, all right, well, I'm like, there's a certain moment where you need some work-life balance, and that was just the grind all the way through. And it's just like, well, I don't have any time for myself to decompress. I have to go from that city hall meeting, and then it's like, all right, clean my face, and then I got to head to bed because I got to get up at 4 o'clock the next morning to get back into the radio station for those early morning news hits. And so that didn't really go so well either. It wasn't necessarily my cup of tea. And um, we decided to part ways after that. I was there for 4 months, 4, maybe 5 months. And yeah, so we decided to part ways. And at the time, my old PE teacher from high school, he is the color commentator for radio broadcast for Northern Illinois football. And so he reached out to me and said, "Hey, we need a sideline reporter for our final 2 home games. Would you be interested?" I said, "Absolutely. Let me know what dates." And so I would drive the 5 hours down to go do those games at Northern Illinois, and then I'd spend the night at home and then drive back up north. Because at the time I still had a month left on my lease, so I wasn't just gonna, waste that money. So I was still using my lease up in Wisconsin, and so that those couple of games allowed me to get in contact with the athletic department at Northern Illinois, and I realized that there was nobody doing their softball, and I said, "Hey, I just need reps. I want to continue getting reps. Is there a chance that I could do these softball games? You don't have to pay me an exorbitant amount, like give me 25 bucks for gas. That's it." And so that just started me doing home softball games for Northern Illinois. And I did that for about a year. Following fall, football season came back, and I got moved up into the press box doing their public address announcing. And then that was, yeah, that was 2018. So right after that season ended is when I started looking at stuff for the West Coast League, and that's when Ridgefield opened up. They were saying that they were going to be a new team that year, and it kind of fell and worked that way. From what I heard, they were supposed to hire somebody else like a couple weeks before the season started, and but he didn't have a huge baseball background, and so they were a bit nervous about that. And I just reached out at the right time, and had my own equipment, which was a big plus for them. They didn't have to shell out any money for it, and we were able to put on a broadcast, and they were thrilled with it. And so they took that leap of faith on me, and it worked out, I would say.
And man, you have an amazing story that a lot of people, think it's tough out there, but you went through some times that a lot of people won't go through with, having to live out of your car and everything. And how do you even stay motivated during that time to stick in a broadcast when you have, like stuff like room and board and food as a concern and you're trying to stick it out and keep doing play by play?
Yeah, it goes back to having some help. So again, like will never admit that I did this all on my own by any means, but I'd made 2 separate friends when I was in Port Angeles, and they were amazing people. And so basically, I would sleep in my car in the 24-hour parking lot at Safeway, and then either day I would go to one of their places to like go shower. And so like for me, it was I want to stay in this area. That was one of the motivating factors. And two, it was just like I can't. It drives me crazy. And my wife will attest to this too. But like, I need something to do. Like I can't sit around and do nothing. So, like I said, I'd wake up in the morning. I'd spend a couple hours in the library just scouring any job posting websites to see what was available in the area, because for the most part, I wanted to just, if I couldn't get broadcasting, I wanted to live out here. Um, because I just loved this area, and I was sort of over the Midwest, and Like again, one of the reasons why I left Midwest and took the Ridgefield job is because the last winter I was in the Midwest, we had the polar vortex and it was negative 40 degrees outside. And I was like, I'm done. I'm over this. I don't want to deal with the Midwest winters anymore. And it's just I'm hard-headed in a way, I guess you could say, of I've wanted to do this. I met the Cubs play-by-play broadcaster, Pat Hughes, and I was in second grade. And I was like, that's what I want to do. And as we've talked about, like there are days when I don't know if that's possible. Like everybody has their down days when they think about that in a way, but it was just, hey, I'm gonna do this, and I've got enough people that have backed me, that have believed in my work, that I know I'm on the right path. And so I shouldn't necessarily, give up. Um, Even though there are certain times where it's just like, man, I'm so beat from working this second job just to try to make ends meet, or I'm looking to work for this other guy to, call state championships, and you agree to some certain payment and that guy cuts your pay in half because he doesn't want to pay it anymore. And it's just like, well, this isn't a fun experience for me anymore. But like when I was in Port Angeles and living out of my car, I mean, the motivating factor for me was just I needed to live, I needed to work, I could not sit still, and didn't want to be victim is not a right word, but I didn't want to be a man, I don't know, I can't even think of the right word right now, but I just didn't want to be the person to just give up because they ran into one tough moment. And this was so early into my career too, right out of college, where it's just like, hey, listen, um, there's going to be bad experiences. One of the biggest things for me, believe it or not, was reading Al Michaels' book. You Can't Make This Up, I believe was the name of that book. Recommend it if you haven't read it yet. But he talks about his beginning stages of his career. And it's like, Al Michaels got fired from the Lakers. Like, does anybody remember that? No, but he only did the Lakers for 1 year and he got fired, but he was still able to make a career out of it. And so, you know, that was my mindset to it. I was like, listen, that was a bad experience. Everybody's going to have those ones where they deal with people that they do not like in the industry. It happens everywhere. Just don't let that deter you from what you want to do. I still had passion to do play by play and I still wanted to do it. It was just finding the right spot. And at that moment, when I was living out of my car, it was, I just need to find a job, anything, supermarket, working at a bank, picking up trash, whatever it is. But nobody was hiring at the time, and so that's part of the reason why I ended up going back home. But for me, it was, I wanted to be there. I wanted to make it work out, and it just didn't. And sometimes that happens. But the important part was to just not give up because I could have. I feel like had I folded and just given up right after that experience and just gone home, I don't necessarily think I'd be here today. Um, just dealing with that adversity, dealing with terrible people, but dealing with so many good people to bring back those good graces of why you want to be in this industry. So yeah.
That's crazy and just an incredible story to share, and also will help those that are probably out there and thinking they won't be able to make it. That's definitely quite a lot to overcome. And you mentioned Al Michaels and Pat Hughes. I'm wondering, do you have any best announcers or guys that you've met, in person so far, and people that you look up to in the industry as well that are motivational?
Yeah, obviously Pat Hughes is number one on that list. I mean, he's the one that really got me started into doing it. I was fortunate enough when I was at Central Michigan before he passed, Dick Enberg came back, and he's a Central Michigan alum, and he talked to a group of us, um, and shots, I would say, like as a mentor, she has done a lot for me, whether it's talking me off the ledge for the most part on those down days that we've talked about, or just having that professional insight of somebody who's been in the industry for 30 plus years now. Um, I think about baseball, like Buck Martinez for the Blue Jays. He's a personal favorite of mine. My family goes to Canada every single summer, and they've got a cottage up there. It's like 2 hours north of Toronto. So I watched a lot of Blue Jays games growing up. And Buck Martinez is up there for me as well. I've never met him personally, but just the way he attacks the game and engages the listeners has always been a point of emphasis that I would like to try to create in my broadcast. And so, yeah, I'd say it's probably those three. Um, but I would never say that I'm not picking up things from other people. I think that's kind of shutting yourself off. Being in this industry and you know being on this side of the mic now and listening to professional games, like there's always things you can sort of pick up on. You're not necessarily stealing it from somebody, um, or like there's phrases you can steal, that is stealing, but like how they deliver something is something that you can pick up on and you can do as well. And so like Mike Breen is a strong basketball commentator. For me, basketball, when I got to UP, was my least confident sport. But because there's two seasons going on at the same time, it's allowed me to get my basketball reps in, and I feel way better about it now than I ever have. But yeah, I'd say Pat Hughes, Buck Martinez, um, those two are up there for me. Al Michaels as well. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot. There's been some quality broadcasters over the years that, like I said, you don't want to steal from them, but you want to learn from them and pick up certain nuances that you can add to your own broadcast. Like one of the best compliments I ever got. I don't let it go to my head because it's praise and I appreciate it, but it was very high praise. But Wes Harper was a pitcher on that 2019 Ridgefield team. And his dad came up to me at the end of the season. He goes, I loved your radio broadcasts, everything. He goes, hey, listen, when I was a kid, I listened to Vince Scully all the time. I love your broadcasts, your streams, your away games when you're on the radio call. Listening to you brought me back to feeling like when I was a kid listening to Vince Scully. And, obviously that's high praise. I don't consider myself Vince Scully by any means. I've got a long way to go to get to that point. But that compliment though, that sticks with you. Like you're doing something right when somebody comes up to you and says that type of stuff. And your ability to, especially with baseball, it's slower. So you have to tell a story and still keep in mind what pitch just happened and everything else like that. And that's what he was complimenting me on was my ability to tell stories while also keeping up with the game when the pitch comes in, where it's at, what type of pitch it was, and we're back to the story. And it's special in a sense to hear that type of stuff, but you can't let that, like go to your head. And as I said, like I know I'm not Vince Scully by any means, so it's just something to strive for. Like, hey, this is a good starting point. Let's keep going further with it.
For sure. And, is there any, just to sort of wrap things up here, is there any favorite road trip you have in the country or any awesome stadiums to stop at?
Hmm. I mean, is it like any road trips like ever, or does it have to be baseball related or what?
Could be absolutely anything.
Man, I've driven across the country for 3 times now. Everything, anything. I mean, I've driven out to the West Coast twice now from outside of Chicago and taken two different routes. And like, there's so much beauty out there. There's so much to see. I drove through North Dakota. I was like, I've got no interest in being in North Dakota. But I went to the Teddy Roosevelt National Park that's in North Dakota, and it was stunning. The Painted Hills or Painted Canyon, excuse me. Painted Hills is in Oregon, but painted canyons and you know seeing the wildlife there. It allowed me to go through Montana, which if you've ever driven through Montana, it is just straight mountain ranges. It's gorgeous. You feel like you're driving to the mountains the entire time you're there at 80 miles an hour because that's what the speed limit is. Um, and so I've gotten to see Yellowstone National Park. I've seen bison up close, and like road tripping across America is its own kind of special thing, I would say. You think about how small some countries are, then vastly how big the United States is. And when you're driving across it, it takes a really long time. And so I've had some great experiences of being in Denver on the way back from the that 2016 summer in Port Angeles, I had to drive back home and spend some time in Denver because I had family there, and that allowed me to do that. And I would just say, embrace the road trip. Maybe that's a Midwestern mentality because we're used to long car rides because we don't really fly anywhere because some stuff is just close enough to drive. But everybody should do it at least once. I would highly suggest it. There's so much to see out there. Even just leaving the state of Illinois, leaving the state of Michigan, the Midwest in general, and just seeing what else is out there is um, I cannot recommend it highly enough. As for like a road trip with the baseball team, um, I would say the Walla Walla one, but not because we went to Walla Walla. We went to a town called Leavenworth, which, if you're unfamiliar with it, Leavenworth in Washington is sort of like a European town. Like that's how it's sort of set up, like a European ski town. But it gives you all those feels of a European town, and had a river running through it. For us, it was really hot that day. We were dealing with no AC on the bus, so it's like this was our opportunity to get off the bus in 100-degree weather, and it was 108 on the bus. So believe it or not, 100 degrees felt cool to everybody, and so yeah, I would say that just seeing the town. Just going out with the guys. I mean, I don't know how else to really describe it, but just like I'm thinking of, believe it or not, we had a guy named Jack Bauer on our team, and he also wore 24. And then we had a guy named Dominic Enbody, who I believe he was on the Raptors for three total seasons now, 3 summers, I should say. But like getting to know those two guys, they still live locally, and just sitting down and having a meal with the guys. To be honest, don't be afraid to sit down and just chit chat with them. They're guys just like you. They're grinding it out like you're trying to get reps for broadcasting. They're trying to get reps for playing baseball. And that's all it is. You guys have a common goal, but it's just in two separate entities or territories, however you want to call it. But yeah, I would say that road trip to Leavenworth with the guys is pretty good. And then road trip wise, I mean, man, I almost forgot about Nashville. Nashville's great. I mean, if you've never been to Nashville, there's tons to do there. I know everybody focuses on the bars on the main strip, but there's a lot to Nashville. So sort of like a mini Vegas in a sense of like there's uh multiple Vegases within Las Vegas. There's multiple Nashvilles within Nashville as well. And that was when I went on my road trip down to Orlando for the baseball winter meetings. That was an interesting trip in itself. But yeah, I would say those are probably some highlights from road trips.
Yeah, and there's a ton of road trips you'll take as an announcer, and they're always exciting. So that's great to see. It's one of the pros of the job. You'll get to see a lot of different stuff, and certainly get to travel around. And but that's about all I had here for Bryan. Thank him for taking the time. He's got a wonderful thing going on over there in Portland. Starting in August, you're gonna see him be all over the place there. So definitely check out his broadcast. And Bryan, thank you for taking the time. We'll certainly be in touch, and I had a wonderful story to share with everyone out there.
Yeah, Dale, thank you for having me here, and best of luck with Ridgefield. You're gonna have fun there.
All right. Thank you so much, Bryan. See ya.
See ya.